Hello, it is October 28th, 2024. It's been a minute since my last devlog update. I'll speak to that in the description of the video, but keep it brief because there's naturally a lot to talk about. Because we're going so far back, excuse me if this is a little discombobulated, I do have notes that I take. I do kind of like top level, so trying to show any specifics in this case will be a bit tricky because I've just kind of re-dig my way into the code, into the blueprints to find what yeah, there's a lot to show as soon as I start the game, so we'll just do here. Already there will be new stuff, like very evident, but we're gonna go in order. Excuse me, chronological order. So we'll get around to everything. Pardon me. Okay. Since the last devlog update, the first thing that I did was I implemented crouching. Yeah, so you can see hitboxes change, it's kind of its own persistent state, similar to how idle and walking are. I don't know if there's like too much to really speak to that. I can try to look at the implementation because I remember it being a little bit since that I needed to track key holds. Let's do that. Kicks down. Okay. So yeah. So the logic here is actually a little more cumbersome than you'd kind of expect, just because I have this had this concept of returning to a passive state, and the passive state is to just refer to a state where input isn't necessarily being. So it's like it's basically just idle or falling, effectively. So the interesting part here, right, is that crouch, while it is not truly passive, you have to hold the button, it's otherwise pretty close. You're kind of just in it indefinitely. And unlike walking, which is where I could use the animation blueprint, checking for if there's any like a forward vector, or it's called like player movement. If there's a forward vector or a backward vector, I can tell like the animation blueprint, hey, we're walking, do the walking animation. But here, because that's not the case, I needed a new way to like measure whether or not the down key is being basically. So there's actually just now a boolean for it that we're either setting when it gets started or unsetting when it's finished, and then set we return to passive state. So there's this extra check here though. This looks kind of redundant, right? You'd think like, well, shouldn't you obviously be in crouching state if you were holding it and then released it? And the answer is in a vacuum, yes. But let's say I'm crouching and I get struck and then I release it. The implementation without this boolean check wouldn't understand that we're not even in the crouch. Like, it wouldn't recognize that you're now in hit stun or whatever. And so it would actually let you return to passive state, return to idle, just by releasing the key. So that was not ideal. Yeah, okay, so you can see here, I don't use return to passive state, but it is a persistent state, which is the concept I was talking about before. I'd say the key distinction here in implementation, if I dig into the orchestrator, is that we're not doing a bunch of logic for executing the state with its like various hitboxes in sequence. We're kind of just mapping the hitboxes we care about immediately. So that's a not very good explanation to say there's a lot of logic we can skip, and there's basically one set of hitboxes that we care about, and that's just like whatever the state is. So right here, there's literally just the one hitbox. Walking, same idea, like walking and standing. There's just the two hitboxes that are always active. That's all this custom event is really doing. So let's see, that's crouching. there was a little bit of refactoring on the animation blueprint front. To be honest, I'm not sure I could even point it out at this point. Like, I don't remember what I changed it to and from, because it was an iterative process. I'm drawing a blank. How do I actually get to the commotion stuff? Yeah, okay. So I am handling crouch in the animation blueprint just like I was for other things. If I'm not mistaken, I'm keying this off of is holding down. So it kind of mirrors the walking speed stuff, the horizontal speed that I was using before for doing that. Is on the ground, and then also check forward walk, which is checking both which way they're facing and the speed of the character. So basically just brought that stuff in line with how I already had the persistent state of walking and standing. I think the rest of this is mostly the same. I think I just like reorganized it a little bit. I think this is more legible than it was. Okay, the next thing that I would like to talk about is actually blocking. So I'll give a small demonstration. In here we have the debug attack still. That just spawns a big hitbox on top of me. I believe at the moment there is a concept of low, high, and overhead. If you're not familiar with the art from a fighting game, that's like a very typical phrasing of the types of strikes you can have in a 2D fighting game. They're not the most intuitive, but low basically being like something that's probably like at waist, like below waist height, high being waist height to head, but coming from their, I guess, waist height to head, and overhead, which is generally reserved for either a particular small subset of attacks, at least in Street Fighter, or from jumping attacks, which I don't have a jumping attack yet, but conceptually I can support it now. So I believe by default this low attack, yeah, you can see in the top left there's that little blue debug message, hit landed because not holding down against a low hit. It's not the most intuitive reading, but it's because right now I'm holding back, but I'm not holding down as well, so I'm not crouch blocking. I guess the same message when you're just standing still, which is, it could be better, but it's also just a debug message, so who really cares? If I do hold down, I get a different message. Hit landed because not holding the correct block. Correct block in this case meaning left or right. I'm not holding left, so I'm not blocking the direction that the attack is coming from. I think I had to hard code that to make it register. Or it might be based on where the opponent is, actually. Yeah, okay. And so there was the block, you actually saw it. There's an animation, kind of like skids back a little bit. Which, I mean, there's already knockback on strikes, like landing. Sun hits, we'll call them. But now, because blocking is a thing, conceptually, there's also knockback on block, so, or pushback. You can see that they're distinct. So, like, let's see, I got my foot. My foot is on that. My right foot, my forward foot is, I'm trying to get the toes on the line. Okay, whatever, good enough. Is on that line. If I get hit, I get knocked back, let's say, a third of a square. And but if I block it, okay, there we go. Move more like a sixth of a square. I believe for the current implementation, we can actually just look instead of me guessing at my own code. But while I look for it, I believe that the current implementation is just using like a factor adjustment. Like there's one knockback value, and it's either the full value if you get struck, or it's half value if you block it. Let's see. Stun shift, block shift. Okay, no, so they are actually completely distinct values. My mistake. It might be the hit stop that I'm thinking of. Yeah, hit stop is one value, and then by going into the logic here. But before we do that, let's do check if blocked. So I have a bunch of old code here that does not need to exist. And the actual stuff that matters is this up here. So picking up the state, or picking apart the state, excuse me, that our player is currently in. State block capable. Alright, I should just say block capable. It's part of the state struct, which is why that's there. The block capable, this boolean is just to ensure that you can't hold like back while doing unpunch or anything, and that would effectively let you block. There might be a cleaner way to do this, in the sense that there's not actually so many times that you can block that it needs its own boolean. Like, it isn't gonna be a thing that's move by a move, you know, open to variation. It's gonna just be like, are you standing, crouching, walking, or in the air, not committed to an attack? Then you can block. But as I'm saying that, it's like what, like 5 or 6 states that are doing it. So, and it's also, if I wanted a move to have a guard point, just to say it blocks while still being a move. Maybe this boolean should exist. I have to think about it more, but for now, the way it's handled, there's just a value that is captured in state. I think by default, almost every move is not block capable. But anyway, we check that first, because if you're not able to block, then why do any other logic to check if you're blocking? We check if both directions are being held. This is something I never really considered while playing like a fighting game myself, just because you would never do this. It's both awkward on a D-pad and impossible on a thumbstick, but in theory you can't hold both directions at the same time. For certain D-pads, right? Not an Xbox, but a PlayStation one, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, you can totally just do that. Obviously though, we don't want to be able to just block left-right mix-up by holding 2 buttons and not thinking. I've considered this check as a means of like nullifying any sort of like BS where you would just ignore left-right mix-up. If you're holding both, it's like you're holding neither, effectively, for blocking. Determine hit type, this is what I was talking about before. We've got overhead, high-low. Basically the way this works is all 3 of these funnel into this check horizontal input, and this one is gonna do a check on some new booleans that are also being added, which are just hold left, hold right, kind of like the hold down. The logic here is just basically like making sure, hey, relative to the source of the attack, are you holding the correct direction? But separate from that, in order to, so I was talking about overheads, highs, lows. Speak to that further. Fighting games, if you are being hit with a low, it's not enough to just be holding backwards. You have to be holding down and back. So you have to be effectively in a crouch state. You can technically like block at the very same frame it hits you, and so you won't look like you're ever in crouching, except for the block usually looks kind of like a crouch itself. But point being is you have to be holding down, so it rewards, not rewards, that's not the word I want to use, it requires a certain element of either guessing or prediction to know like what they're gonna do. Like if they're gonna do lows, then I better be holding down during my block string. Inversely, overhead's the opposite. You cannot be holding down. If you're holding down, if you're in a crouch state, the overhead will pass your guard and strike you like above the head or whatever, you know. That's like how it's sold. Obviously the move can look like whatever and doesn't technically have to make sense, but yeah, so. Overhead's a little complicated too. I've tentatively made it so that air blocking is a thing that can exist conceptually. And so continuing that whole sequence I was explaining with how blocking usually works. Most fighting games that I've seen, if they have air blocking, it's not a universal mechanic in fighting games, but if they have air blocking, there's no concept of high or low. If you're in the air, you are just blocking or you're not blocking. And so, in this case, actually, this should apply then to low as well, if I'm not mistaken. double check that here in a second. But anyway, the point being is if you're in this state, you kind of get to bypass this other check where we're saying don't hold down. That's what I was saying earlier. If you're blocking overhead, you cannot be holding down. Or you can be in the air, in which case it doesn't matter if you're holding down because that just isn't relevant anymore. If I did this right though, okay, good, yeah, I did. Then the same applies to the low. It's not as intuitive because it's pretty rare that you would be in the air and hit by a low attack. The timing on that's a lot tighter and it's less common. Whereas if you're getting in the air, you could be hit by an airborne move pretty easily. That would be an overhead, so it's way more common. So that's why I was unsure. But anyway, same logic here. You must be holding down in this case, or if you're in the air, then it's irrelevant. So still not a good demonstration of this just yet. I don't have any air attacks, and the air states are still a little bit like funky. I don't have like a proper like neutral fall or backwards fall. I mean, yeah, like I kind of just fall back on the game's generic logic for handling falling. So, but it will be something that I can probably demonstrate too far down the road. But anyway, so yeah, we do all the necessary checks for inputs, and based on that, we determine whether or not they blocked or did not block. And based on that, we either push them into the handle stun method, which is what was the sole thing that existed before, or we put them to the handle block. So, in either case, they actually act pretty similar, if I'm not mistaken. So much so that it's tempting to say that maybe they should actually just be in the same method, and it should fork differently as far as like the state that gets applied based on whether or not they blocked or whatever. I don't know, there's a couple things that change, right? Like I mentioned, the hit stop duration looks like it divided by 3. That goes down. There will also be stun types, which is still not an implemented feature, but the idea of a stun type is like sometimes in fighting games you strike a character and they just kind of wince. Sometimes you strike them and they crumple. Sometimes you strike them and they get launched into the air. There's just a variety of ways that a character can react. That's not just how they animate, but it's actually like the state that they are put into. So that's something that will cause these two functions to kind of deviate from each other. So I think it actually might probably make sense for now to leave them separate. Maybe once I get closer to implementing that, I'll think differently. But for now, it's good. Let's see. Yeah, so right now, it's just hard-coded standing hit reaction, because I've only got the one hit reaction. I don't think it makes sense to, like, make this faux method where I figure out how they should react when I don't have good ways to represent the other states. I believe I'm doing the same thing here with block. I only have the crouched block animation, so just hard setting it right now, but in theory it should be dependent, I guess, on the state that the player currently is in. I think in blocking's case it's only going to be the 3 states of blocking, which will be standing, crouched, or airborne. But maybe not. Let's see what else we got. Ooh, let's see. So I don't remember how the prior implementation actually looked, but shifting, as I call it, which is where the character's like getting kind of moved, whether it be from their own attack or from hit stun, or I think jumping might even be considered a shift. I can't remember. There's like it kind of encapsulates both just gliding along the ground, but also launching the character. Anyway, this has been reworked, and so now it's like a time-based set of like micro adjustments to the movement. Whereas before it was like I believe it was just a jolt. Like you punched in on the frame where the shift applied, the character just skipped forward like 100 units or whatever the number is. It's not super obvious here because it's still like pretty quick and snappy, which is ideal. But I can go into the data table. Let's use this actually. Alright, There might have been a small cut there. I got a phone call, but I'm back. So the thing I was doing was demonstrating how the shifting can be modified, not just in the distance, but in the timing of it. So we looked at the far jab, and so let's look at the shift here. So I believe the frame and the vector, those are old values that have existed. I mentioned before a distinction between I think looking at my notes here, it's called either a launch or a slide, because a slide stays on the ground. That just has to do with the fact that if you try to do a launch that is purely horizontal, it it's not truly it's not truly purely horizontal in Unreal. Unreal will put a little bit of like y value or what's the axis, whatever, the upward axis in order to get the character off the ground, because I believe otherwise it either doesn't know how to, or it's accounting for the fact that friction will kind of skew the launch to act kind of funky. So, but duration, frame duration is the new catch here. So, in this case, it's always you're setting the calling it calling the launch vectors maybe a misnomer when it comes to sliding, at least, because it's more like the distance that you're actually traveling. So in this case, we're moving 35 units split up over 2 frames. So if I wanted to make it really kind of slow and sluggish, we'll move at a fifth of the speed, but we'll still go the same distance. So let's look at that. Actually, it doesn't look too bad. I guess 10 frames is still pretty quick when you get down to it. This could be reasonable. Let's go further though, just to really capture it. Now it takes a whole half second to travel that distance. Keep in mind the animation does not adjust for that at all, so that's when you get kind of weird stuff like this where they're just kind of crawling while the punch is happening. And the same logic is being used in hit reactions. We could make it so that actually, is that true? Let's see, is that strike groups? Yes, stun shift. Okay, yeah. So you can see we've got a stun and a block shift. So from the jab, when we strike them, they move backwards 10 over 3 frames. But if we wanted to, let's make it backwards 100, so they'll go pretty far back, like probably to the edge of the screen or close to. At frame within 3 frames. So it's a static. It's a linear movement. The way it's done is it's actually like you're setting a offset on the. Let's see if I can actually show it. If I recall correctly, though, we're within the shift timer are setting an offset that is just being applied over the course of the duration, and it's dividing up the total movement by the number of frames that we're doing it for. So just a print statement. Yeah, there's a lot of. Oh yeah, this is it. Okay, so let's back up a bit because. All right, so shift timer spawns kind of just like any of the other timers. It's just whenever we are setting up a state, we're going to make these, but we're going to also then designate like the frame for them to actually be active. So we first ensure that it is not the very first frame, because if it is, then we just call the method directly. Otherwise, we're doing a set timer. We add to the timer handles. So in theory, it should be affected by hit stop, and it'll be cleared out whenever we're done with the state. I want to say this actually doesn't work the way I intended it. It's probably a matter of when hit stop is applied versus when shifts are applied. I think what's happening is we're applying hit stop and then we're applying the shift, so the timer doesn't get paused. So just calling that out, that's a bug that I've seen exist. And yeah, anyway, so we're doing event tick. We're doing if shifting is enabled, which is part of this apply shift. That flag gets set there, and if it's true, then we're just adding actor world offset. So it's just a linear value. I want to say there's probably okay. That was interesting. My headset just turned off, even though I'm talking into it. Anyway, there is a. Oh, I don't have this music playing. Oh, okay, that would be a 5-minute dry period there. That might be why it turned off. There is just a linear application of these segments, and so this is we'll look into apply shift and what's going on there. Like I mentioned before, we check if it's a launch just via flag, and based on that, we do 2 different logic pools. The launch is the one for jumping. I don't think anything really applied too much here or changed too much here, but for slides, which is the new thing we're using for the ground, like punches and stuff, we set up the shift segments, which we already kind of looked at, which is just take the vector for x and z, divide it by the duration, we set it, and so if you want to move 100 units over 10 frames, you're moving 10 units per frame. So that's all that is. And then enable shifting, which is where we just set that Boolean value. And now that we have started shifting, we also want to destroy the shift timer once we at the end of the duration. So same thing here. We got timer handles being destroyed or being stored and then destroyed. So that's all that's happening here. Yeah, like I said, it lets us do some fun stuff like adjusting how characters react, or during their, during their moves. So we can do this. We have them fly really far back, but now we'll make it happen over 10 times as much time. Oh, it looks really. It's very jank looking because I'm also sliding. We're like both sliding at a kind of similar rate. Yeah. Let me fix those before I forget. So it's -10. This is 3. Duration, this one was 2. Double check that really quick. By check it, I mean yeah, okay, that looks right. Next. I already spoke to it, but there's pushback on blocking. That was something that got implemented after that stuff, the sliding and all that. Okay, so one thing I got to do here that wasn't, I mean, it was kind of inspired by feature, but it isn't explicitly feature work, is the refactoring of hitboxes. So I wish I had made a diagram actually. It would have been nice. So there's now in total 6 hitbox objects. To start off, we have hitbox base, which is like the top level parent. You can think of it as an abstract class because I don't ever want to instantiate one. I don't believe abstract classes exist though in Unreal. I could be mistaken on that, but so far as I could look up, there isn't really a way to do that. You could do interfaces, which are kind of similar, but I wanted to have the interface doesn't hold any logic. It's just the contract of like method headers. So I wanted to have a little bit of logic here, which is basically just the drawing of the box. Every hitbox has like coordinates, I guess. Well, actually, yeah, that's not even held here. That's just the scaling. But it does also have, yeah, the opacity and the color. There's a little bit of setup here just to make it so that that stuff, the color, the material is even dynamic, something you can change. So not much here. This is, again, not something you'd ever instantiate on its own. From there, there's a fork. There are active hitboxes, and then there's another group that doesn't actually have a like subparent. So you could call them passive hitboxes, but there isn't a actual passive hitbox. And I guess rather than jumping into this one right away, it'd be easier to explain the other boxes to get a sense as to what they're actually used for. Yeah, like what their distinction is. Close team. Is there a good way I could actually just search up the 3, 4? Okay, well I have, so I made textures to act as icons for them. It turns out I can't set them, but they're at least helpful to visualize what I'm talking about. So there's 4 here. They're in a weird, like, strewn about place positioning. But you can see a strike box and a heart box. Strike box is kind of the new term to represent what I was calling just hitbox before. Basically, like, I still sort of use it interchangeably, but before I was calling everything a hitbox, and I was just also making a Boolean flag, like, is this hitbox a hurt box? You know, like it's a subcategory. Now it's more like everything is a hitbox. There's no like question of that, but the distinct types are strike box and hurt box, which is the one that is active and hurts if it touches a hurt box. There's also these 2 new ones, which, I mean, they kind of like spoil something that has been worked on, but there's now a grab box and a handle box. And they're similarly, they're counterparts, where the same way strike box is looking to intersect with hurt box for a reaction, grab box is looking to intersect with handle box for a reaction. And so you might have already noticed it, although it's not like the most obvious thing. But there's actually, separate from the 2 green giant squares that have existed on Manny's idle animation for a long time now, there's actually this yellow one. It's easier to see when I'm crouched because it doesn't change. That is the handle box. And so when I was talking before about active hitboxes and then like the non-existent grouping of passive hitboxes, hurt boxes and handle boxes are the passive ones. They exist to be intersected with. They otherwise don't do anything. They just kind of sit there. They're the representative, like, the point of the character that can be struck or touched or interacted with. Strike boxes and grab boxes are they're the action, they're the movement, they're the thing that seeks connection. So the distinction here that I was trying to set up or get to is the active hitboxes have a little bit of logic for when they intersect their counterpart. So I already clicked on it. Oops. So the only thing that the hitbox _ active does to extend the base hitbox is they have this variable for a relevant hitbox class, which is as of right now, it's basically handle box for grab boxes or hurt boxes for strike boxes. That's kind of not a intuitive way to phrase it, but I think it makes sense if I restate it. The hurt box is relevant only to strike boxes, and the handle box is relevant only to grab boxes. Grab boxes, which is the active hitbox, is looking for handles. Strike boxes are looking for hurt boxes. I hope that makes more sense. So what we're doing is we're doing a handle overlap, and we're just seeing, like, is it of that class? If so, then we are stating this is a valid intersection. And this function does not actually get used in here. This is basically just like a utility, or like not really utility. It's the overarching function that is used between strike boxes and grab boxes, and so they will use this to their own logic to determine what to do next. So strike boxes are, like I said, they're basically just what hitboxes were being called before. Or strike boxes are what the general term hitboxes meant previous video. So nothing really changed with their logic. grab boxes. Grab boxes, basically when they make connection with the handle box, we'll put both players into a like a scripted little montage, like where they're both sort of synced up, and apply what is now called a grapple, which is a little confusing. I think the terms get used interchangeably a little bit in fighting game context, but the grab is the move that goes out to connect and see if a grapple is initiated. The grapple being the animation then where one usually hits the other and they take damage. So currently that's just mapped to the L key, so you can see there's our grab box, it's the blue one. If I connect with the green hurt box, you can see nothing happens. But if I inch forward, boom, we get a nice little connection. And I haven't spoken to it yet, but I'm sure there's no way you haven't noticed there's health bars now at the top. You can see that we're actually getting damage on the headbutt and a little bit on the bounce when they hit the ground. So that's one of the things that was made for or implemented into grapples, is there is logic to apply these sort of spurts of damage and hit stun. I believe it is, yeah, I think it is just applied. Trying to remember where I set that up. Oh, here we go. Handle next cinematic strike instance. Kind of a mouthful, and maybe not the most intuitive name, but I'm sort of making this forward thinking for like how supers are going to be implemented. They're kind of going to have a similar thing where there'll be just like a canned animation where character A is hitting character B and set points of the animation. Even though neither player is interacting at this point, they're just watching it together. You want the damage to be applied when the hit of the animation plays. So where does it get called from though? Handle next cinematic. Oh, that's right. Oh yeah, this is kind of cool. I did my first implementation of an animation notification, or term this. So if I go into montage or the recipient, you can see we've actually got 2 notifies, and it is animation notify apply cinematic strike instance. So it's kind of not as obvious to tell since you're only seeing the one character, but this is the moment where they're being struck in the head. Like, I'll just kind of drag through. Character gets pulled forward, they get kind of hoisted up onto one foot, they're grabbing the other player's hand, and boom, they get headbutted like right here, they fall back, and then boom, they hit the ground and they do kind of like a small bounce. So those were the 2 instances of damage come from. Most of it's going to be here, some of it's here. But yeah, this is my first time working with this. I had heard of animation notifies for some time, and there's maybe something to be said about using this in other places. Things like I could honestly like map the hitboxes through the notification system, like drawing hitboxes. That way, it's probably it's a pretty moderate to heavy refactor on my stuff. But there's something to be considered here, like if I want to retime an animation, so like maybe that jab that I've used since the beginning, maybe it comes out faster. If I just sped it up, that's going to force the hitboxes to all adjust. But if I was using the animation notification system, yeah, I believe it would just like retime automatically, right? Like if I scrunch the animation, like the notification should just squeeze in with it. And if not, I still think that would be an easier way to visualize the timing of it. Maybe, because I can't see the hitboxes from here. I'm watching, but yeah, it's a consideration. So anyway, yeah, this they get put into a state or a montage, and now there is a notification that's being received, and so what do? We grab the owner, cast them, and we call handle this next strike cinematic instance. So that's just a new thing that now exists on state. As I'm looking at this, I kind of feel like maybe when we are in the class, maybe when we're doing the event where we're handling being grappled, maybe the strike sentences should be inserted here instead of applied at the state level, just because I've been trying to avoid like just dumping endless attributes into the state machine body. It's like, because it's kind of a catch-all. To some degree, that is just what it is. It's the state and handles like everything. But it always feels so clumsy when I add like a whole array of stuff that is only relevant to a small number of the types of state that gets processed. But anyway, for now, every time you call that handle strike instance, we pull the array from the state. There's some debug methods I have here. I forget, there's another one somewhere further down the thing that checks to make sure that we call this method the same number of times that we actually have strike instances in the array. If we call too many or call too few, then something's wrong. But anyway, we grab the next one, I could say. I'm kind of treating this, it's an array, right? But I'm kind of treating it like a queue, if you're familiar with different data holding objects. I'm treating it like a queue where I'm like taking one off and then, then I remove it. So, kind of like just working down the array. Apply the damage and evaluate the hit stop. And that's all these really are. If I go to the struct, I think that's all you'll see. Damage, hit stop, duration. Yep. So I could for the sake of demonstration, I could do something like really extend the hit stop duration of one of the instances. There's none right now on the bounce. That's just because I didn't want to have like a bunch of. I think having one like really snappy, like a punchy pause when the headbutt happens is fine, but I don't want to have it like every time, every little instance has one. But for demonstration purposes, let's say there's a pause now when the character bounces for like 1 full second. Poof. You can see how that applies. Or we can do it the other way. Table. And by the other way, I mean do it on the other instance. Yeah, it's a very small one. I'm gonna copy this value because I'm not gonna remember that. So yeah, you can see how it's pretty flexible, like our state machine up till now has been, which I really love. The other thing to call out is this enemy offset. This is again another thing that had to be implemented for grapples in particular, but it could also at least be applied for hit grabs and just certain moves. I wish I had like a demo right in front of me, but I can think of a couple in like Dragon Ball FighterZ where character might do like a flurry of punches, and you don't want the character to like slide out of the flurry because it just feels jank and not as responsive as you want. So sometimes this flurry will actually like vortex the enemy player into the attack, so long as they get hit by like the first hit or whatever. So the enemy offset here, this is what is enabling the snapping. So you might notice, like looking at our handles, the yellow bars, or our pill capsules, either one, you'll notice that we're pretty far apart, but then as soon as the grab lands, we snap into place. I would love for the camera to be smoother about that, but point being is it lets us get close enough that the grab animation actually lines up. Pardon me. That required a little bit of more work than it might seem because we also have to disable the pill capsule collision. If you just try to like offset them from each other, the hard collision that's currently existing for the pills will then push them apart immediately. So be like we'd be doing the animation, but we'd be this far apart, which, as you can tell, like how close we are to actually make it line up doesn't look right. So that was a little tricky because then you've got to reset the collision back when you're done, but you can't just reset collision all the time when you're ending states because that makes jumping act funny because it's also reliant on collision turning off and on. So there's a little bit of like walking around eggshells with that, but we got there. Oh man, let's see. Yeah, so I guess the last thing is the health. There's not really too much to say. In previous videos, you've probably seen like the damage variable floating around in a lot of different structs and stuff. I've just been mindful, thinking ahead. As like, you know, attacks got to deal damage. That's very intuitive and obvious. So just like accounting for it by having a variable on attacks is pretty straightforward. So I have implemented a very simple, I guess, two displays. There's both the number and the bar. You know, the bar is more realistically what you would see in the game. The health value, though, is really nice to get like cleaner feedback. So, yep, and it more or less, I'm not even in a demo that you can change it. It's very obvious. I was looking at the strike instances a second ago. Yeah, very cool. Not really. I'm tooting my own here, my own horn, but I'm happy with how simple it was to implement at least. There's no handling for when you get below 0. So there's not quite an end state. It's not quite a game yet, but you know, to be done in the near future. I think that. Let's see. Yeah, I think that about does it. Kind of scrolling through my notes. Looks like I kind of covered all the things I wanted to. Naturally, there's a lot of time sank into like bugs getting introduced, regressions here and there. I touched on some of those, but it doesn't really deserve like a whole bunch of expanded time, especially because this video is already pretty long. I said I was gonna do it in the description, but screw it, you know, I might as well do it in the video. This video is long for a couple reasons, or this video is a long time coming for a couple reasons. It's been pretty late behind. Like the last video I did was in August, so almost 2 full months by this point. Couple reasons in place. One is, as you can see, I just did a fair amount, and I kind of just let feature creep take the reins. Not to say that it's really feature creep, because those are things I had to do and I wanted to do, but like it's for the sake of the video, I just kept putting off the video. Because I was like, kind of like on the edge of getting a new thing. It always felt like that was like a nice big element to introduce. So that delayed the video. Secondarily, I am now in job hunt mode. I don't know if I've spoken to it in this series, but currently I'm actually in between jobs. I'm kind of taking this project as my main job. But very recently I'm starting to do the job hunt stuff. So that means, you know, time invested in my resume, invested in setting up a portfolio to view this stuff, which, you know, I'll, I guess, put in the link in the description for this one and maybe every video hereafter. But that stuff is taking time. I'm like studying up on C++. Obviously I've done a little bit in this project, but I think it's good to nail down the fundamental, like general rules of the language, because right now I'm just sort of like marching through the dark to get to the one point of knowledge that I need, and then I'm back in blueprint land. So yeah, that's where the time's gone. And to that point, I want to continue working on Project Blue. I'm having so much fun with this when I do work it, so I don't want to lose. I don't want to like just completely flip my priorities. especially because this is in service of the job hunt in a sense. Like if I just stop working on it and the job hunt is unsuccessful, then I did nothing. But what I'm trying to say is I'm looking to mix up my cadence here. Before I was doing once a week, and then I said I was going to do it like on a feature by feature basis. I think for the sake of kind of keeping something of a, how do I say it? Committing on some level to having like regular updates. I'm probably looking at splitting my time between this and job hunt related stuff, and I think every 3 or so weeks is what I'm tentatively saying. I'm gonna try and post like a new update, and I think that gives me enough time to have at least some feature work done, and then also not like be stressing about making the video every single week, but also, you know, it gives me time to do the other stuff, the stuff that's, I guess, a little more critical, right? Like, getting the job, getting the income. So, and it keeps me accountable. So it's I think it'll be a healthy cycle here once we get going. So it's the 28th. I started doing the job hunting stuff, like doing applications late last week. So it'll probably either be 3 weeks from today or last Friday, we'll say. Somewhere in that range. Yeah. So anyway, as always, thank you so much if you watched through all of this. Stay tuned. See ya.